This is the new 2021 Genesis GV80, and it is the first Genesis SUV. Finally. Genesis launched a few years ago as Hyundai's luxury brand, just like Lexus is Toyota's and Acura is Honda's, but they launched with 3 sedans into a world of SUVs. But the first Genesis SUV is finally here, and today I'm going to review it. Before I get started, be sure to check out Cars and Bids, which is my new online enthusiast car auction website with cool cars from the modern era. If you're looking to buy a cool car from the 1980s and up, Cars and Bids has the best selection and variety with auctions running all the time of cool, interesting cars. And if you're looking to sell a cool car from the modern era, Cars and Bids is the place you will get the most views and the most money for your cool car. Check out carsandbids.com. So let's talk GV80. This goes on sale shortly, and it has a starting price of around $50,000, which places it right on par with the Volvo XC90 and the Lincoln Aviator, and a little bit more expensive than the popular Lexus RX and Acura MDX. 2-row seating is standard, but the GV80 is offered with an optional 3rd row if you want to use it for kid transport duties. Under the hood, the GV80 offers 2 options. Base models come with only a 4-cylinder, but it's a 2.5-liter turbo 4 with a surprisingly potent 300 horsepower. Or you can upgrade to a V6 like in this GV80, which has 375 horsepower. That's a big number, and it comes with a starting price of just over $60,000. Also important is the fact that the GV80 is here at all. Like I said, Genesis launched with 3 sedans modeled after Lexus's launch when it first came out about 30 years ago. But obviously the market has changed since then, and it took Genesis too long to create an SUV. But it's finally here, and now Genesis can truly start to rival established luxury brands like Volvo, Lincoln, Lexus, Acura, Mercedes-Benz, and all the others. And today we're going to find out if it's a strong challenger. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the GV80, and I'll show you all of its interesting quirks and features. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'll give it a DOUGSCORE. Alright, I'm going to start the quirks and features of the GV80 with probably its quirkiest quirk, and that would be the fact that I can move it by remote while standing outside. Alright, check this out. On the remote, there's a little button with a circle marked hold. If you press and hold that button down, the GV80 turns on, as you can see. Then there's a little button with a car on it and an arrow and a P. If you push that and hold it, then the GV80 moves forward on its own. As you can see, I'm not in it, not sitting in the driver's seat, but I am holding down the button, and the GV80 is moving forward all on its own like a remote control car. And it can do it in the other direction as well. Press the other P and arrow button on the key fob, and as you can see, the GV80 is now backing up. I'm standing outside of it, no one is in it. I'm just controlling it with a remote, which is pretty cool. Now, you might be wondering, why would anybody ever actually want this feature? According to Genesis, the thinking is if you live in a tight city and you park in a tight parking garage, or someone has parked too close to you in a parking lot, you can just move the car out without you having to squeeze in and figure it out. You can just stand there and move it. It only goes forward or backwards. It doesn't turn or avoid obstacles, but you can move the car with the remote, and that is how it works. But anyway, I already showed you that remote control car moving trick in my review of the Genesis G80 sedan. Now I'm going to go over some quirks and features that are unique to the GV80, starting with opening the tailgate, where the tailgate popper is in an odd place. You look around back here, you don't really see it. That's because it's integrated into the wiper housing. You can see there's a little picture of an SUV with the tailgate up. You push that, and then the tailgate opens just like this. Now, once it is open, you can see there's a lot of cargo space back there. This model has the 3rd row seat, but it's folded down, and for a vehicle this size, it's a pretty large cargo area, at least while the 3rd row is down. But let's say you want to put the third row seats up. In the back of the GV80, you are lucky. A lot of new luxury SUVs have power folding and raising third row seats, and the GV80 does also, but the cool part is they're labeled with this circle button back here. You can see 3L, 3R, 2L, 2R, and a lot of SUVs, you're pressing the button thinking, I'm not sure if this raises the left seat or the right seat, but here you press 3L and the third row seat on the left side raises or lowers, whichever you want. That is clever, and it makes it a lot easier to figure out which seat you're actually putting up or down. Now, like a lot of luxury SUVs with power folding third row seats, you can raise or lower the third row back here. You can put them up or down, which is a nice touch. Unlike a lot of SUVs with this feature, you can also put the second row seats down. You press the 2L button, and the second row left side folds down. Press 2R, second row right folds down. Pretty simple. Unfortunately, you cannot re-raise the second row from the back. If you want to put the second row back up, you actually have to go around to the seat and put it up manually. But probably the coolest thing when it comes to third row seat moving is in the third row itself, you have this little button over on the side split into two, one with an arrow in the backrest pointing up and one pointing down. You press that and it actually moves the backrest forward or backward automatically over on the side of the seat you're sitting on. This car has power operated third row seats, at least the backrest component. That is something I have never seen before in any vehicle at any price point, and it is a pretty cool feature for third row passengers who usually get stuck with the cheapest, crappiest materials, since they're not intended to be back there for very long trips, and they're usually kids. But that isn't the only cool quirk in the third row, so let's get back there and check out the rest. Unfortunately, that's easier said than done. Now, getting access to the third row is actually pretty easy. You have this little circle button on the side of the second row. When you open the door, you push that, and in one motion, the seat moves forward and the backrest folds forward to provide easier access to the third row. Very nice to see. Just one press and the third row is accessible. A lot of SUVs make you do a two-step process. And it's the same deal if you're sitting in the third row and you're trying to get out. You can see there's a button on the backrest for the second row. You push that, and again, one press, the seat rolls forward and folds forward to make it easier to get out of the third row. This is probably the best third row entry and exit button system in the entire car industry, and I will use it now and demonstrate the problem with getting into the third row, which is it's just not all that big back here. Even though the seat scoots forward, there's just not all that much space, and when you climb in back, you can see just how incredibly tight it is back here as I get caught on the seat belt and as I can barely fit in the third row. And it is really, really tiny back here, one of the smaller third rows. Like I mentioned earlier, the GV80 comes standard with 2 rows of seats. You only want to get the third row if you're going to use it for kids or for very short trips. It is not a large full-size SUV with a big third row you can sit in comfortably. It's just for kids, but if you have your kids back here, you will see some interesting benefits, although I'm going to start with a drawback. There are no charge points in the third row. A lot of new third row vehicles have charge points back here so that passengers in the way back can plug in their devices and charge them as they drive, but not in the GV80. A bit of a demerit, and it's too bad, frankly. However, there are some nice touches back here. For one thing, you have your own climate vents on each side of the third row, and not just some tiny vent integrated below the seat you can't really see that doesn't provide that much air. You get actual real climate vents on each side that look like what you would have in the front, so it can pump out real air to the third row passengers, which is often a complaint of a lot of 3-row SUVs. You also get cup holders back here, individual, one for the passenger side and another one over for the driver's side, and you get this little storage cubby. You press this button, the cubby opens, and you have a little third row storage back here. Although you only have that on the passenger side, the driver's side third row passenger doesn't get to store anything in the third row. One other thing that really stands out in the third row in the GV80 is the quality of the materials back here. Everything is surprisingly nice for a third row. For instance, that climate vent is beautifully trimmed with this ridged aluminum look, and it looks really nice. Same deal with the cup holders, same deal with that button that would raise or lower the backrest automatically. For third row seats, which are usually stuck with the crappiest materials, this is pretty nice in the back of the GV80. And the high level of materials quality is something that's carried all throughout the GV80, and to me, it's a huge selling point for this car. This is only a mid-trim level GV80. It is not the highest top-of-the-line model, and yet everything in here is really, really nice. For instance, now I'm in the second row, the back seat, and you can see the rear seat climate control dials are rimmed with this gorgeous textured silver trim. It looks nicer than what you'd find at any other rear seat climate controls at this price point. Even the little button to fold the second row seat forward is surrounded by this beautiful silver trim. That simple functional button looks nice. Everything in this car, the materials, they're just fantastic. And speaking of fantastic, it's worth noting the interior room is a lot better in the second row of seats than it is in the third row. I have the front seat pretty far back, about where I would sit, and you can see I have decent knee room back here, good headroom, and the seats are very comfortable. So the second row in the GV80 is a very comfortable, very nice place to be compared with the third row, which you really only want to use in a pinch. And next up, we move on to the front of the GV80, where there's a lot to cover. But again, one of the biggest things you notice up here is the quality of the materials. Everything is gorgeous. The whole interior just looks good from the driver's perspective. You have this beautiful wood trim in the center, stitched leather everywhere. On the door panel, the controls for the windows and the power mirrors are very nice. Everything in here looks good, feels good. This GV80 has a sticker price around $66,000, $67,000, and to me, it has the interior of a car that is much more expensive than that. And again, I think that's going to be a huge selling point for people who prioritize luxury, comfort, and quality over anything else. But high quality materials are by no means the only notable item up here. There are quite a few interesting quirks and features, starting with the gear lever, which is kind of odd. It's this crystal circle in the center console, and in order to get the car in gear, you twist it to the right to go into drive, you twist it to the left to go into reverse, and of course neutral is just sort of like a half twist in the middle. If you want to go into park, you press the P in the center of the gear lever, and then you're in park. A bit unorthodox, but it looks good, and it feels very heavy and weighty when you move it. And the gear lever isn't the only strange control in the center console. Another one is this large circle next to the gear lever. That can be used to adjust the infotainment system, this large screen in the center. This is also a touch screen, but it's positioned pretty far up on the dashboard, so it can be a little hard to reach. So you can use this little circle like a dial to scroll through various different pieces on the screen, just in case you don't want to reach up to the screen itself and tap it. Also unusual in this center console is the volume control, which is this dial here. It's not a usual knob you turn to the left or right, but instead you move it up or down in the center, and that adjusts your volume. Unorthodox, but I must say it looks and feels good in that position, and it works fine. And next up, another notable item in the center is the climate controls, which in the GV80 are not physical buttons. Instead, you have a climate control screen, as you can see here, and it's a touch screen. You can use this to move the airflow around, to turn on the heated seat, the heated steering wheel, and it works pretty well. Very intuitive, very sensitive to your touch. It works exactly like you'd expect, but it allows them to clean up the look of the center, not jam as many buttons in here, and get all of the climate controls in a physically smaller area since it's all on this screen. And speaking of interesting screens in this car, the one in the gauge cluster is rather unusual because it is split. Over on the left, you have a traditional analog gauge, like you'd see in an old school car, and over on the right, you have a large screen, like you'd see in a new car. For some reason, they've done both. Now, this screen over on the right has one of my very favorite new car features. When you put on the turn signal, it pulls up a camera showing your blind spot on the side you've just signaled on. Interestingly, because there's only a screen on the right side of the gauge cluster, this camera pulls up on the right side regardless of whether you're signaling left or right, which can be potentially a little confusing, but since you're going in that direction, it shouldn't be too hard to figure out. Either way, I love this feature, love this turn signal activated blind spot camera, one of the best safety features in the car industry, and it's tremendously helpful when changing lanes, especially on a highway. Now, earlier I mentioned my recent review of the new Genesis G80 sedan, and in that review, I freaked out over the gauge cluster. It had this 3D cluster. You'd look at it and it was on like different levels and I couldn't really show it, but it was amazing. It felt like the future. This car doesn't have that, the GV80. Like I said, this is a mid-trim level model. That feature is only on the highest level GV80, the very top of the range. If you get the mid-level model, this one, I guess you're stuck with the 2D gauge cluster and the analog gauge like a peon. Next up, another interesting item up here that I didn't point out in my G80 review, but I should have, is the steering wheel, which is quite strange. It's just this like single spoke across steering wheel, very different from what you get in every other modern car. In fact, a lot of crappy 70s and 80s American cars had steering wheels with only one spoke across, and I guess Genesis is bringing it back. It certainly looks different. I'm not really sure that it looks good, but it's distinctive. Only Genesis is doing steering wheels like this right now. It's very odd shape and design for a wheel. And finally, I want to move on to the infotainment system, which has quite a few interesting quirks and features of its own, some of which are unique to the GV80. One that isn't is sounds of nature. This is a feature available in new Hyundai and Kia models where you can listen not to the radio or your music player, but to nature sounds that are preloaded into the car, including like a rainy day and like a beach with waves and an open air cafe. And by the way, an open air cafe isn't actually a sound of nature, but whatever. Now, I have to say, I have made fun of this feature in a few videos before on Genesis and Hyundai models, but I must admit, I've had a few of these as press cars now, and whenever I get one, I turn that on and I drive around and listen to like a rainy day or a forest. And I kind of prefer that to music. And since they're going for luxury in this interior, having that sort of nice, beautiful background noise, I actually like it more than I thought. Something I would never say. It's grown on me considerably, and maybe it's worth listening to if you have one of these cars. But anyway, a few other infotainment system quirks. One is a feature called quiet mode. You can see it there. If you activate that, then the music you're listening to only plays into the front speakers, and the volume in the front lowers. The theory here is you have kids asleep in the back or the third row, you can still listen to music, just not all that loudly, so you don't wake them up while you're driving along. That is a nice feature. And here's another nice kid-related feature, something called passenger talk. If you activate this, then your voice will be projected to the third row using the speakers in the vehicle. Then you don't have to turn around and yell at your kids. You can just talk normally and they'll hear you anyway because your voice is being sent back there through the speakers. I've demonstrated this in a few new vehicles. It's becoming more and more common in three-row SUVs, and I suspect within a couple years it's going to be in all new three-row SUVs. And finally, one last interesting quirk of the infotainment system is the ability to configure the position of the third row seat. You go into seating in the infotainment system and you have the option to adjust the third row. You can raise or lower it using the screen, which is a wonderful feature. You're sitting up here, someone wants to load something in the back, but the seats are up. You don't have to get out and go back there and do it yourself or try to explain to them how to use those controls on the side. You just go into your infotainment system and you lower the seat by yourself. You can also raise it back up again. You can see, push the seat and it automatically rises up while you're sitting here. Again, the benefits are obvious. Someone wants to climb into the third row, but it's not in place. You don't have to get out and put it in place. You can do it from the comfort and convenience of the driver's seat. And you can also lower the third row headrests from this screen. So if you want the third row in place, but you're having trouble seeing out the back, no one's sitting in there, just lower the headrests and then you can drive off. You don't have to go back there and lower them yourself just for more visibility. And finally, we move outside the GV80. We go under the hood where you can see the 3.5 liter V6. Like I said, this is the optional engine, 375 horsepower, which is a strong number. Interestingly, the base power plant is a 4-cylinder, which isn't common in this segment, but at 300 horsepower, it should be a pretty potent 4-cylinder, and I suspect most people won't bother upgrading to the larger V6 engine. The extra power just won't be necessary. Now, since I'm outside the GV80, two exterior items worth mentioning. One, I love the look of the front turn signals. Mentioned this in the G80 review as well. I love how this 2 lines of turn signals in the front almost looks like it's going through the wheel arch to make 2 lines of turn signals on the side. Side turn signals are a requirement in many markets, and most automakers just tack them on and they look ugly. It is very cool that Genesis actually integrates it into the design and takes a regulation and makes it look good and cool and interesting. Also looking good on the outside of this car is the the car itself. The GV80 is a fantastic looking SUV, very beautifully proportioned, very simple, elegant, clean design. It really looks fantastic, a very nicely designed, nicely styled SUV. And I think the gorgeous look on the outside, coupled with the gorgeous look on the inside, will be a huge reason why a lot of people buy the GV80. Overall, a very good looking SUV. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Genesis GV80. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the GV80. I've been driving this around for a couple days now, and the first thing that I have noticed is it's not really sporty. This was also true of the new G80 sedan. That kind of surprised me. I thought they would be taking on, you know, BMW 5 Series and going for performance and handling, and they've got rear-wheel drive and these powerful engines. The truth is, they're not really. They're really focused more on the luxury aspect of things, and that's really clear the moment you get in and you see the interior and you see this, you know, single spoke steering wheel. That's not a sport steering wheel. And you see the materials in here, and there's no carbon fiber, there's no crazy, you know, jagged lines making you think this is something young and fun and unique and cool. This is intended for relaxed comfort and sport, and I think that Genesis thinks there's an opening there, that so many automakers are going the sport direction between Lexus and BMW and Mercedes and Audi, that maybe the few left fighting for luxury, which is basically Volvo and Lincoln and then, you know, Infinity badly. This is a place that they can get into. They can show the world, hey, we make really high quality cars, and they do. But the downside is not very high performance on the road. Doesn't feel really all that fast despite the power. And that would kind of be my take home message with the GV80. Very nice, very luxurious, nice ride, high quality, very comfortable in here. But don't buy this thinking it's anything other than a luxury vehicle. Now, it's a bit of an interesting position for Genesis because these luxury-focused cars, typically that's associated with older people who are more willing to buy sort of entrenched brand names. So having a more luxury focus, you'd think they'd be going after younger people willing to change brands, but instead the luxury focus goes after kind of an older crowd. So I'm not really sure if that will be successful for Genesis, but it certainly is what they're doing. I also want to mention a couple of other things. Technology in here, very nice. I really like the center touchscreen, although it is a little bit far away, and so being able to use this little controller is nice, but it would be better if the screen was just closer and then you could simply touch it. The third row seat, really, I want to be very careful to mention this again. It is only for children, very small. If you really need a third row, you're going to use it a lot. You're looking at Mercedes GLS, you're looking at BMW X7, Navigator, Escalade, and maybe minivans. You don't want to try to cram people in this third row for long. Overall, I think this GV80 is a really, really competent, solid effort. It is luxurious, it is nice, it drives well. It is not high performance or sporty or exciting, and so I wonder how Genesis is going to do to take young buyers over if luxury is their focus. But it's a good vehicle, and it's definitely worth consideration if you're looking for a nice luxury SUV with really high quality materials and good technology. And so that's the Genesis GV80. This is an excellent luxury SUV, gorgeous both inside and out with great technology, and it drives well. This could be a serious contender. Honestly, the biggest problem Genesis will face is their brand name, which just isn't as strong as Mercedes-Benz or Audi or even Volvo or Lexus. But the GV80 will certainly help it get there. Anyway, now it's time to give the GV80 a DOUGSCORE. Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the GV80 is a handsome SUV, gorgeous for an SUV, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Acceleration does 0 to 60 in the low 6-second range, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Handling is normal for an SUV like this, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Fun factor, also normal, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Cool factor is decent. This is sort of cool because it's new, and it's the long-awaited SUV from Genesis, but it's not exactly head-turningly cool, and it gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 21 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. The GV80 has a lot of available tech, although the mid-level model I drove was missing a few things. Still, the GV80 gets a 7 out of 10. Comfort is excellent, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is high, the materials are great, and the long warranty is a huge plus, better than rival luxury brands, and it gets an 8 out of 10, which is excellent for an SUV in this segment. Practicality is also high, given the cargo space in the third row, but the third row is pretty tight compared to rivals, so it gets docked a bit, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, value, and the GV80 is a very good value, though not not quite a great one. It's well priced, especially given the quality, but ultimately it's an upstart brand that is more expensive than some established rivals like Lexus, and it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 37 out of 50. Added up, and the DOUGSCORE is 58 out of 100, which places the GV80 here against relevant SUVs. It's near the bottom, but this isn't as bad as it looks because I included a lot of SUVs on here that are way out of the GV80's price range just for comparison's sake, like the BMW X7 and the Cadillac Escalade. Compare it to its closest rivals and the GV80 falls in the middle. And that makes sense. It has some great benefits like tech, styling, and interior quality, and some drawbacks like okay pricing, a cramped third row seat, and an upstart brand name.